Don't forget to subscribe. Enjoy your viewing.
I had always believed that our marriage was built on trust, loyalty, and an unwavering love that would sustain us through any storm. My name is James, and for as long as I can remember, I considered my wife, Emily, not only my partner but my best friend and confidant. I took pride in the life we had built together, a modest home full of hope and the promise of a shared future. Little did I know that everything I held dear would soon shatter in a single, unanticipated moment. It started with subtle hints, a misplaced smile when she thought I wasn't watching, a fleeting, secretive glance exchanged with someone new, and a distance in her eyes that I couldn't explain. We had begun renovating our old family home, determined to transform its tired walls into a warm sanctuary reflective of our love. I immersed myself in the work, believing that every nail hammered and every stroke of paint would rekindle the fading sparks of our life together. Yet, amidst the dust and chaos of construction, I began to notice an unsettling change that gnawed at the edges of my heart. Our renovation team included Mark, a skilled repairman whose reputation for efficiency and easy charm had preceded him. Mark was in charge of the storeroom, a small, cluttered space filled with our old tools and equipment. This room, replete with relics of our past and symbols of our future plans, had always been just another part of our home. I never imagined it would become the stage for a betrayal that would redefine everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. One cold afternoon, while searching for a missing tool among the boxes and scattered hardware, I pushed open the creaking door of that storeroom. I expected the usual jumble of hammers, saws, and paint cans. Instead, I found myself frozen in disbelief. There, in the soft, dim light that filtered through a dusty window, stood Emily, her delicate hand entwined with Mark's in an intimacy that spoke volumes. In that single, excruciating moment, the room seemed to shrink around me as if the very air had thickened with betrayal. I could not move, every instinct screamed to retreat, yet my feet were glued to the spot as I absorbed the horrifying truth. The shock was absolute. My heart pounded so fiercely I thought it might burst, and time itself appeared to slow down. I could see the unmistakable passion in their eyes, a passion that had no place in our marriage. For a long, agonizing minute, I simply stood there, my mind trying desperately to reconcile the memory of the gentle, loving Emily I once knew with the woman I was witnessing before me. Every cherished moment we had shared, the quiet evenings, the heartfelt laughter, the soft touches, all were now tainted by a betrayal that cut deeper than any wound I had ever experienced. In the aftermath, I retreated into a darkness that I had never known. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of loss that made every breath feel heavy. I began to notice everything, the way Emily's eyes avoided mine, the lingering traces of an unfamiliar scent that clung to her clothes, and the soft hum of whispered phone conversations that abruptly ended when I entered the room. Each detail was a painful reminder that the sanctity of our union had been irrevocably violated. One chilly evening, as the wind howled outside and the autumn leaves danced in the fading light, I summoned the courage to confront her. My voice was barely a whisper as I asked the questions that had tormented me since that fateful day. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she confessed. She admitted that during one of the renovation sessions, in that very storeroom, she had found solace in Mark's arms. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling neglected while I was lost in the work, and of a desperate need for validation that drove her into the arms of another. Every word she uttered was like a shard of ice piercing my already shattered heart. I felt a tumult of emotions, a scorching anger directed at both Emily and Mark for their callous betrayal, and a profound sadness for the life we had so carefully constructed, now reduced to a series of painful, bitter memories. Our home, once a testament to our shared dreams, had become a monument to deception and lost trust. I found myself wandering through empty rooms late at night, haunted by echoes of laughter and whispers of promises that were never meant to be broken. Each step I took was laden with memories, the feel of Emily's gentle hand in mine during happier times, the comforting murmur of her voice, the warmth of our shared smiles. Now, every recollection was overlaid with the searing pain of betrayal. I questioned everything. Had our love been nothing more than a fragile illusion? Were the promises we made merely words without meaning? The images of that day, the day I discovered the truth, replayed relentlessly in my mind, each iteration intensifying my anguish. In the solitude of my despair, I grappled with the unbearable reality that nothing could ever restore what had been lost. The home we renovated together now stood as a constant reminder of our broken bond, a physical representation of a trust that had been forever betrayed. I wondered if I could ever rebuild not only the crumbling walls around me but also the fractured pieces of my heart. The very thought of forgiveness felt like a betrayal to the pain I was forced to endure daily. That autumn, as nature itself began to wither under the weight of impending winter, so too did the remnants of our love. The bond that had once seemed unbreakable was now nothing more than fragile, shattered glass, each piece reflecting a painful memory and a trust forever lost. I knew deep inside that some wounds were too profound to heal, that some betrayals could not be mended by time or sorrow. Now, as I sit in the fading light of another long, lonely evening, I write these words not in search of sympathy but to record the truth of my experience. I am a man who believed in forever, only to learn that forever can sometimes lead to a cruel, irrevocable goodbye. The memories of that day are indelibly etched into my soul, a permanent scar that reminds me every day of the fragile nature of love and the harsh reality of betrayal. I stand at a crossroads, forced to choose between clinging to the ruins of what once was or accepting that our paths must forever diverge. The trust that bound us has been shattered beyond repair, and the love we once nurtured is now nothing more than a painful recollection. My journey from this moment forward is one of rediscovery and redefinition, a quest to find meaning and strength in the face of a betrayal that has altered the course of my life irreversibly. The painful truth remains, some endings are destined to be as hostile as they are final. In the days following the revelation, the house took on a strange, almost spectral quality. Each room echoed with memories of happier times, now drowned by an ever-present heaviness. I found myself unable to escape the relentless thoughts of betrayal that haunted every corner of our shared home. I oscillated between numb detachment and seething anger as I struggled to make sense of a reality that had upended everything I once held dear. The confrontation was inevitable. One rainy evening, when the sky was weeping along with my heart, I approached Emily. I remember standing in the hallway outside our bedroom, listening to the soft murmur of her voice as she tried to reconcile her own guilt. My pulse raced, my hands trembled, and I felt as though every step toward her was a step deeper into a personal abyss. With every beat of my heart, I felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "Emily," I said, my voice cracking with a mix of sorrow and fury, "we need to talk." Her eyes, red-rimmed and full of regret, met mine with an intensity that simultaneously pleaded for understanding and shamed her for the secret she carried. She led me to the living room, a space that had once been our sanctuary, and there, in the quiet gloom of the evening, we began a conversation that would alter the course of our lives. Emily tried to explain herself, her voice barely audible over the patter of the rain against the window. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling neglected while I buried myself in work and renovation projects. I felt invisible, she admitted, her eyes darting away from mine as if searching for an escape. I was lost, and I thought I found solace in someone who made me feel seen. Her confession, though raw and honest, only deepened my sense of despair. I wanted to understand, yet every word felt like a reminder of the love I had lost. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, an anger so fierce it threatened to burst forth, mingled with a profound sadness that weighed heavily on my soul. I recalled the day I discovered the unthinkable, the moment I had stood frozen in that cluttered storeroom, and I wondered how things had come to this point. Each memory was like a dagger, twisting in a place where trust once resided. I demanded details I thought I could never bear to hear, desperate to grasp every painful nuance of what had happened. But even as I pressed for answers, I felt an overwhelming emptiness, as if the life we had built together was now an illusion I could no longer cling to. The conversation spiraled into a torrent of blame and regret. I told her how devastated I felt, how the image of her with Mark had become an indelible scar on my heart. I recounted the cold shock of that fateful day and how, in that moment, every cherished memory was tainted by betrayal. Emily's tears flowed freely as she admitted to the guilt and shame that had consumed her. Yet, amidst her remorse, I could sense a cold finality in her words, a resignation that suggested she no longer believed our marriage could survive this breach of trust. Outside, the storm intensified, mirroring the chaos within me. I began to question everything. Had our years together been built on a foundation too fragile to endure such devastation? I wondered if the vows we had exchanged were nothing more than empty promises in the face of reality. In that dimly lit living room, with rain lashing against the windows and the sound of our shattered dreams filling the silence, the possibility of reconciliation seemed as distant as a fading memory. The confrontation was not simply a verbal exchange, it was a crucible in which the truth was laid bare, harsh and unyielding. In the hours that followed, I wandered through the darkened halls of our home, feeling like a ghost in a place that once belonged to a vibrant love. Every step echoed with the realization that the life we had known was irrevocably altered. I tried to recall the warmth of her embrace, the sound of her laughter, the gentle way she used to look at me. But each recollection was now intermingled with bitterness and a sorrow that threatened to drown me. Unable to find solace in the familiar spaces of our home, I retreated to the solitude of our garden. The cold, damp earth underfoot was a stark contrast to the burning turmoil within. I sat on an old bench beneath a weathered oak tree and allowed my thoughts to unravel. I thought about Mark, not as a person, but as a symbol of the ultimate betrayal. His name echoed in my mind, and I struggled to understand how a man I barely knew could have so easily become the embodiment of my deepest hurt. The realization that my wife had found comfort in the arms of someone else was both surreal and devastating. It was as if the very essence of our marriage had been dismantled, piece by painful piece, leaving me exposed to a raw vulnerability that I had never known. In the silence of that rainy night, I recognized that the path ahead would be fraught with anger and resentment. The idea of forgiveness, once a distant hope, now seemed as unattainable as a mirage in a desolate desert. Each moment was a reminder of the broken promises and lost trust that had brought us to this bitter crossroads. I questioned whether I could ever rebuild a life from the ruins of what once was or if the chasm between us had grown too vast to ever bridge again. That night, as I sat alone under the dark sky, I came to a painful realization: our marriage was on the brink of collapse. The intimate bond we had cherished was now marred by deception and hurt. The thought of a future spent in the shadow of this betrayal was unbearable, and yet the idea of completely severing the ties we had forged over so many years filled me with a deep, gnawing sorrow. I recognized that the anger I felt was not just for the act of infidelity, but for the loss of the person I thought I knew so well. In the days that followed, every interaction with Emily was laced with tension. The once familiar routines of our daily life became battlegrounds for unresolved emotions. I found myself questioning every smile, every touch, and every word exchanged between us. The lingering presence of Mark in our home, as a constant reminder of the transgression, only deepened the rift. Conversations that once flowed naturally were now fraught with silence and painful stares, and every shared moment was tinged with the awareness that nothing would ever be the same again. I began to understand that while time might eventually dull the sharp edges of this pain, the memories of this betrayal would remain etched in my heart forever. The transformation that had taken place within me was irrevocable. I was no longer the man who had once embraced hope and trust. I had been irrevocably altered by the harsh truth of human frailty. The shattered pieces of our past lay scattered around me, and in their disarray, I found no clear path to forgiveness or reconciliation. As the storm outside began to subside, a heavy silence settled over our home, a silence that spoke of endings and the looming promise of further heartache. In that quiet aftermath, I understood that our lives were diverging irrevocably. The love that had once been our guiding light was now obscured by the dark shadows of betrayal and loss. I resolved that the only way to honor the truth of what had transpired was to face it head-on, even if it meant accepting that our journey together was coming to an inescapable, hostile end. Thus, with a heart heavy with sorrow and eyes open to a painful reality, I made the decision to step away. The path of reconciliation was no longer a viable option, and in its place loomed the uncertain terrain of solitude and rebuilding. The confrontation had stripped away the illusions, leaving behind a raw and bitter truth that could not be denied. As I stood alone in that dim, rain-soaked night, I knew that the story of our love was drawing to a close, a conclusion marked not by mutual forgiveness, but by an inevitable, acrimonious separation. In the wake of that fateful confrontation, I found myself slipping further away from the life I had once envisioned. The days blurred into a succession of empty routines and sleepless nights as the raw agony of betrayal seeped into every aspect of my existence. The home that had once been our shared sanctuary now resembled a hollow shell, each room echoing with memories of happier times tainted by regret and the overwhelming sting of disillusionment. I tried to carry on with the renovation, desperately clinging to the belief that repairing the physical structure might somehow mend the shattered remnants of our relationship. However, every brushstroke on the wall and every repair job felt futile against the immensity of the void left behind. The very tools and equipment that once symbolized our future were now grim reminders of a past filled with both dreams and betrayals. Mark's presence loomed like an unspoken specter in every crevice of the house, a constant reminder that the betrayal was not just a singular moment but a series of decisions that had irrevocably altered our lives. As the days turned into weeks, I withdrew further into myself. Friends and family reached out with words of comfort, but their well-intentioned advice did little to soothe the searing pain. I began spending long hours alone, wandering through the silent corridors of the house as if seeking an escape from the memories that haunted every step. At night, sleep was elusive, and I would lie awake for hours replaying the moment I discovered Emily and Mark together, an image burned into my mind that refused to fade with time. In this relentless solitude, I turned to old journals and photographs, desperately seeking traces of the man I once was, the man who had believed in the power of love and trust. I recalled the warmth of Emily's laughter, the tender way she would brush a stray hair from my face, and the dreams we once whispered in hushed tones late at night. Those memories, however, were now intermingled with the bitter taste of deception, each recollection a double-edged sword that both comforted and cut me deeper. The isolation became a double-edged curse. It allowed me to process the betrayal in my own time, yet it also magnified my sense of loss and despair. I began frequenting a small cafe in town, a place where the buzz of daily life offered a temporary reprieve from the darkness at home. There, amidst the murmur of conversations and the clatter of coffee cups, I encountered a series of fleeting moments of connection. A friendly smile from a stranger, a nod of understanding from an elderly man lost in thought, these tiny sparks of humanity slowly reminded me that the world outside my grief still held beauty, even if it seemed distant and inaccessible. But as much as I tried to heal, the shadow of betrayal loomed large. Every evening, as I returned to the quiet solitude of my empty house, the walls seemed to whisper secrets of lost promises and broken vows. I became increasingly aware of the legal and practical implications of our disintegration. The realization that our lives were about to be divided, that our shared assets and memories would soon be subject to the cold arithmetic of a legal settlement, filled me with a sense of finality. The thought of splitting our life into tangible parts, our home, our savings, the mementos that once symbolized our shared history, felt like an unbearable dissection of a love that I once believed was invincible. I spent many sleepless nights contemplating the meaning of it all. Was there ever a chance for redemption or reconciliation, or were we doomed to part ways, severing every bond that had once defined us? I recall sitting in my study, the dim glow of a desk lamp illuminating pages of scribbled thoughts and unresolved emotions. I wrote and rewrote countless letters that I never intended to send, letters filled with raw emotion, desperate pleas for understanding, and ultimately, bitter acknowledgments of a love that had turned sour. Each word on the page was both a confession and a farewell, a testament to the person I had been and the man I was forced to become. As the inevitable finality of our separation loomed, I reluctantly engaged in discussions about divorce. The legal proceedings felt like an additional betrayal, an acknowledgement that the bond we had once held dear was irreparable. I met with attorneys and mediators, each meeting serving as a grim reminder that there was no turning back. The process was methodical and impersonal, dissecting our lives into a series of assets, debts, and shared memories to be divided as if they were mere possessions. In those moments, I felt a profound loss not only for the woman I loved but also for the identity we had forged together as a couple. Emily, too, seemed resigned to the outcome. Our conversations grew shorter and more mechanical as we navigated the labyrinth of legal formalities. There were no more heartfelt exchanges, no desperate attempts to salvage what little was left of our once vibrant connection. Instead, we spoke in clipped sentences and careful tones, both of us acutely aware that every word might be scrutinized and weighed in the final reckoning of our lives together. The intimacy that had once been the bedrock of our relationship was now replaced by a cold, clinical pragmatism that left no room for sentiment or forgiveness. In this state of disillusionment, I began to reflect on the nature of love and trust. I questioned whether my own vulnerability had been exploited, whether my deep-seated belief in the goodness of others had been my greatest strength and my most profound weakness. I realized that in loving so completely, I had also left myself open to unimaginable pain. And yet, amidst the wreckage of our shared dreams, I clung to a fragile hope, that someday, I might emerge from this ordeal not as a broken man, but as someone who had learned to redefine love on his own terms. But the reality was stark. The more I delved into introspection, the clearer it became that the wounds inflicted by betrayal were too deep to ever truly heal. The prospect of rebuilding my life from the ruins of our marriage seemed as daunting as reconstructing a shattered mirror. Even if the pieces could be assembled, the reflection that stared back would be forever marred by cracks. As the legalities progressed and our separate lives began to take shape, I knew that the inevitable finality was near. It was during one of those long, introspective nights that I reached a pivotal moment of clarity. In the quiet solitude of my study, surrounded by the artifacts of our shared past, I resolved to let go. Not because I wished to forget the betrayal, but because clinging to it would only chain me to a past that no longer served me. I decided that true closure would come not from rekindling a lost love, but from embracing the painful truth and allowing myself to move forward, alone. Thus, with a heavy heart and a mind burdened by memories of trust broken and promises shattered, I prepared myself for the final steps of our parting. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with lingering resentments, but it was a path I had to walk. In the stillness of that moment, I accepted that our marriage, once a beacon of hope and unity, had irrevocably transformed into a painful chapter of our lives destined for a hostile, final separation. The days had grown colder, as if nature itself mourned the demise of what was once our shared life. I found that each morning brought with it a stark reminder that every sunrise now heralded a future I was destined to face alone. The remnants of our marriage lay scattered, like the torn pages of a diary whose words of love had curdled into bitter memories. I, James, had reached a point of irrevocable decision, and the final chapter of our lives together was set to close with an unyielding finality. Our last meeting was scheduled in a sterile, windowless conference room, where the final legal formalities would be signed, sealing our separation in cold ink. The atmosphere was oppressive, a fitting mirror to the heavy silence that had grown between us over months of painful introspection. Emily arrived with a guarded expression, her eyes distant and devoid of the spark they once held. For both of us, this was more than a legal procedure, it was the ultimate acknowledgement that our hearts had turned to stone long ago, incapable of beating in unison any longer. We sat across from each other at a long, polished table, the weight of every memory making the distance between us feel even more insurmountable. The mediator's voice droned on, detailing the division of assets, the custody of memories, and the last remnants of our shared life. With each word, it felt as though the final ties that bound us were being unraveled before our eyes. I stared at the contract, each clause a painful reminder of the promises that had dissolved into mere paper, void of the warmth and sincerity they once held. During a fleeting moment of silence between the legal formalities, our eyes met. In that brief glance, 1,000 unspoken words passed between us, a mixture of regret, sorrow, and the quiet acknowledgement that our journey together had reached its bitter end. Emily's eyes, usually so soft and inviting, now held a cold detachment that sent a shiver down my spine. I saw in them not the reflection of the woman I once adored, but a stranger, a person who had succumbed to the allure of a fleeting comfort, leaving behind a trail of irreversible betrayal. Outside the courthouse, the chill of winter greeted us, as if the world itself was indifferent to the sorrow we carried. We stood together for a moment under the gray sky, a final, awkward pause before the inevitable parting. No words were spoken, none were needed. The silence, heavy and unyielding, said it all. Our union had become nothing more than a bitter memory destined to fade into the annals of our past. I walked away first, each step on the cold pavement a physical manifestation of my emotional detachment. The streets, busy with life and indifferent to my inner turmoil, reminded me that the world would continue on unabated by the collapse of our love. In the solitude of that moment, I resolved to rebuild myself from the fragments of our broken bond. The journey ahead would be fraught with obstacles, the scars of betrayal fresh on my soul, but I knew that the only way to heal was to confront the emptiness head-on, to carve out a new identity from the ruins of what was. In the days that followed, I took to wandering the city with a detached curiosity, observing life as if I were a spectator in a play that had long since lost its script. I frequented quiet cafes and lonely parks, each location offering a brief escape from the memories that haunted me. At times, I found solace in the anonymity of the bustling streets, a reminder that amidst the vast tapestry of human existence, my pain was but a single, sorrowful thread. I also turned to introspection, spending countless nights in the solitude of my study. I reviewed the journals I had kept during the darkest days of our separation, the pages filled with raw, unfiltered emotions that charted my descent into isolation and my gradual acceptance of the inevitable. It was there, in the dim glow of a solitary lamp, that I began to understand the paradox of loss, that in relinquishing what once was, I might someday learn to cherish what I could become. Yet, the bitterness of betrayal was a harsh teacher, one that left lessons scrawled in scars too deep to ever truly fade. Despite the isolation, there were moments of unexpected clarity, a memory of happier times that, while painful, served as a reminder of the capacity for love that once burned brightly within me. I recalled the gentle laughter we once shared, the way Emily's eyes would light up during quiet conversations, and the hope that had once radiated from our intertwined hands. But those recollections, however tender, were now interlaced with a stark awareness of the fragility of trust. They underscored the painful truth that love, no matter how vibrant, can be irrevocably marred by betrayal. In the final weeks leading up to the absolute dissolution of our lives together, we met one last time, this time not as husband and wife, but as two strangers who had once shared everything. In a small, dimly lit diner on the edge of town, we exchanged brief, measured words. There was no drama, no fervent declarations of lingering love. There was only the quiet, mutual understanding that our paths would now diverge forever. As we sat in that cramped booth, the hum of the diner's old neon sign and the distant chatter of other patrons provided a somber backdrop to our final conversation. We spoke of the future, of the hopes and fears that now defined our separate lives, but the words felt hollow, a mere formality to an ending that was already written. When it was time to leave, we did so in silence. I stepped out into the cold night, the weight of our shared past receding with every step I took away from that place. I realized that the hostile separation we had endured was not merely an end, but a beginning, a final, painful severance that offered the opportunity, however faint, for rebirth. The process of dismantling a life once built on love was agonizing, yet it also paved the way for the emergence of a new self, unburdened by the chains of betrayal. Looking back on the years that led to this moment, I recognized that our story was a tragic testament to the complexities of human emotion, a narrative woven with threads of passion, trust, and ultimately, disillusionment. The finality of our separation was not just a legal decree, it was an emotional exorcism, a forceful liberation from the painful ties that had held me captive for so long. Now, as I stand alone, enveloped in the stark silence of a winter night, I carry with me the lessons of a love that once promised eternity but instead delivered heartbreak. The bitter taste of betrayal remains, a constant reminder of the fragility of trust and the painful consequences of its violation. But in that bitterness, I also find the seeds of a future yet to be written, a future where, perhaps one day, the wounds will close and a new chapter will emerge from the ashes of what once was. This is the final severance, a farewell not only to a partner, but to an entire world built on false promises and shattered dreams. With a heart both heavy and resolute, I now step into the uncertain dawn of tomorrow, leaving behind the ghost of a love that could never withstand the corrosive force of betrayal.